I always believed that family was everything. I spent my whole life putting them first, sacrificing, loving, and protecting them. But when I needed them the most, I realized they saw me as nothing more than a burden. What happens when you discover that the people you love most are the ones who would sell you out the moment you're no longer useful? This is the story of my journey from pain to power, from despair to redemption. And trust me, you won't believe what my son did. At 58, I thought I had seen it all. But life has a funny way of showing you just how wrong you are. I spent most of my life as a mother, always there for my children, always the one they could turn to, no matter the cost to myself. Now, I sit alone in a house that was once full of laughter and warmth, the same house where I spent countless nights comforting my children, where I cleaned, cooked, and gave every bit of myself to make sure they had everything they needed. But today, this house feels like a cold cage. It's the same house that, in my weakest moments, feels like a symbol of my isolation. And yet, it's not the loneliness or my deteriorating health that hurts the most. It's the realization that my own son, Chris, the boy I raised, the boy I thought I knew, is nothing but a stranger now. I remember the night it hit me, the night that changed everything. We were having dinner, just the two of us, a rare occasion since he's grown so distant over the years. I could feel the weight of his indifference, the way he barely looked at me, his focus elsewhere. And then, out of nowhere, he dropped a bomb on me. A joke, or at least that's what he probably thought it was. "I hope you only live for 3 more months, he said, his eyes briefly flickering to mine, "so we can sell the house." I froze. The words hit me harder than any illness could. He said it as if it was just a passing remark, something light-hearted, but I felt the venom in his voice, the truth behind his words. He wasn't joking. He saw me as nothing more than a burden, something to be discarded. For the first time, I understood how little I mattered to him. The pain wasn't just physical. It was emotional, a gut punch that made my chest tighten. I had spent so many years sacrificing for him, for my family, and this was the gratitude I got in return? I remember looking at him, struggling to keep my composure. But inside, everything shattered. I didn't even know what to say. How could I? His words spoke volumes about how he really felt. He was already planning to move on without me, and I hadn't even realized it until that moment. I spent the rest of that night staring at the walls of the house, feeling the weight of my decisions, my life bearing down on me. My health was failing, that much I knew. The doctor had confirmed that my illness was serious, but it wasn't the illness that terrified me anymore. It was the thought of what would happen to me when I was gone. Chris, the child I loved more than anything, was ready to walk away from me, just like that. As the days passed, I began to see things differently. It wasn't just his cruel words that stung. It was everything leading up to that moment. The years of emotional neglect, the slow fading of his interest in me, the way he'd always take, never give. For so long, I had thought he would come around, that things would get better. But now, I could see it clearly. He wasn't coming back. Not for me, not for anything. I started to realize that the life I'd built for him, for us, wasn't mine anymore. It was just a reminder of everything I'd sacrificed for a family that never appreciated it. And what did I have to show for it? A disease that seemed to get worse every day, and a son who couldn't even pretend to care. But something inside me shifted in that moment. I wasn't just going to sit by and let him sell the house I had worked so hard for. No, I would make him see what he had done. I would make him regret ever treating me like this. He wanted me gone? Fine. I'd give him exactly what he asked for, only not in the way he thought. I sat there, in that empty house, with the weight of the world on my shoulders, but a plan starting to take shape in my mind. I wasn't going to let him take everything I had built without a fight. Not this time. Not anymore. And so began the beginning of something far more than just a fight for a house. It would become a fight for my dignity, my self-respect, and for everything he thought he could take from me. But, as I would soon discover, the most dangerous games are the ones you play with your own family. The days after that dinner felt like a blur. I went through the motions, doing what I always did, cooking, cleaning, pretending to be fine. But every moment was clouded by the thought of Chris's words. They echoed in my head, louder with each passing day. "I hope you only live for 3 more months. The sharpness of his voice still stung, and the cruel indifference behind those words made me sick. At first, I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just a thoughtless comment. But deep down, I knew better. His behavior over the last few years had been slowly chipping away at the bond we once shared. He used to be the little boy who would crawl into my lap after school, his face bright with excitement as he told me about his day. He used to care about my opinions, about my well-being. Now he barely spoke to me unless it was about the house. I didn't even recognize him anymore. I spent my days in this house that used to be full of life, but now the silence weighed heavily on me. There was no laughter, no talking, just the sound of the clock ticking away the minutes, reminding me of the time I didn't have left. I had always taken care of everything. I was the glue that held the family together, or at least I had been. Now, I was nothing more than a shadow in my own home, invisible, fading into the background. As the weeks went by, my health worsened. The doctors told me there was nothing they could do. It wasn't cancer, but whatever I had, it was eating away at me. I was exhausted all the time. I couldn't even walk up the stairs without feeling winded, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt most. It was the emotional weight of everything. The loneliness was suffocating. I would catch myself looking out the window, hoping for something to break the monotony, but nothing ever did. Chris never came by to check on me. He wasn't interested in hearing about my doctor's appointments or how tired I felt. He didn't care about me at all. Instead, he was out there, somewhere, making plans. Plans that didn't involve me. Plans that involved selling the house, our house, the one I had raised him in, the one I had worked my fingers to the bone for. And there I was, stuck in it, feeling like I was already dead. I couldn't get the image out of my head. Chris, walking through this house with a buyer, discussing how much they could get for it, laughing about how easy it would be to sell once I was gone. I wondered how long he'd been planning this. Had he been thinking about selling it even before my illness? Or did my declining health just give him the excuse he needed? I could feel the walls closing in on me. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. It was the place where I'd raised my children, but now it was just a reminder of everything I had given up and everything I had lost. I had always believed that family came first, that no matter what happened, we would always have each other. But now I could see clearly that the only thing Chris cared about was himself. He had made it obvious with his cruel joke, and now I knew he was just waiting for me to die so he could cash in on my passing. I felt sick to my stomach, but that's when something inside me snapped. No longer would I let myself be treated like this. No longer would I let him have what I had worked so hard for, not without a fight. I wasn't going to die in this house without making sure that Chris would feel the weight of his actions. I had spent my whole life giving everything for him, and now he wanted to sell the one thing that had always been mine, our home, our memories. He thought he could simply dispose of me, like I was nothing, but I wasn't nothing. I was Linda, his mother, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I had a plan now, a quiet, calculated plan. It wasn't going to be messy. I wasn't going to confront him directly, at least not yet, but I would make sure he understood that I wasn't going to roll over and die just because he thought it was convenient for him. I would take back control of my life, my home, and my dignity, and it would all start with one thing: patience. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea as the weight of the past few weeks settled into my bones. I didn't know how much longer I had, weeks, months, maybe just days, but what I did know was this: I wasn't going to let Chris win. And so, I began to plan. The next few days were a haze of doctor's appointments and unanswered calls. The reality of my health situation began to sink in, but it wasn't just the illness itself that gnawed at me. It was the fact that, in my most vulnerable state, Chris was nowhere to be found. The doctors had given me the grim news. It wasn't cancer, but whatever was wrong with me, it wasn't going to get better. They couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, but I could feel my body shutting down. My energy levels were plummeting. I was constantly tired, and my once energetic body was betraying me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I knew the end was near, though I wasn't sure how long I had left. Weeks? Months? My mind had started to drift to the inevitable. What would happen to the house? What would happen to me when I was gone? The thought of Chris handling everything, making decisions about my life, my property, without even a second thought for me, made my blood boil. He wasn't here for me now. Why would he be here when it really mattered? He never visited, never asked how I was doing, never even bothered to call. It was as if he had already written me off. The only thing he cared about was what came after I was gone. The house. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I wasn't alone, but I knew the truth. I hadn't heard from Chris in days, and each passing moment reminded me how little he cared. I'd always prided myself on being a mother who was there, who cared, who listened, who sacrificed. But Chris, my only son, had been too wrapped up in his own life to notice mine was slipping away. I sat on the porch one afternoon, staring at the lawn, trying to find some solace in the silence. It wasn't until the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway that I snapped out of my trance. It was Chris's car. He got out, looking as distant as ever, his phone glued to his hand. He walked right past me without even acknowledging my presence. "Chris," I called weakly, my voice trembling as I tried to get his attention. He didn't stop. His eyes didn't even meet mine. "I'm busy," he muttered, not bothering to look back. That was it. That was all I got. That was the extent of my son's concern for me. I swallowed my hurt and let him go. It wasn't the first time he'd ignored me. It wouldn't be the last, but this time I wasn't going to let it slide. I had given him everything, my love, my time, my support, and now he was treating me like I was nothing more than a nuisance. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it all settle on me. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let him treat me like this. I wasn't going to let him discard me when it was convenient. It wasn't going to end like this. Not for me. I knew I couldn't change the way Chris felt, but I could make him regret it. I could make him understand the consequences of abandoning me when I needed him most. The house, my legacy, my life's work, it was mine, and he would learn the hard way that I wasn't going to go quietly into the night. As I sat there, the idea began to form in my mind, slow, steady, and full of quiet resolve. I wasn't going to confront him directly. Not yet. I needed to bide my time. I needed to gather my strength and make sure every step I took was calculated. Chris thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know what was coming. I wasn't just going to fight for the house. I was fighting for my dignity. I was fighting for my place in this world, and Chris was going to learn what happens when you underestimate your mother. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience, an almost unbearable waiting game. I made sure to keep up appearances, to let everyone, including Chris, believe I was weak, that I was losing my grip on reality, that I had no fight left in me. It wasn't hard. I had years of practice at being the quiet, supportive mother who never asked for anything. But behind the facade, I was gathering everything I needed. I began reviewing the papers I had around the house, bank statements, insurance documents, everything I could find. My fingers shook as I sifted through the clutter, trying to make sense of it all. I had to be careful, precise. It was clear Chris hadn't been thinking of me at all. But I wasn't just going to let him take the house, not without making him face the consequences of his actions. I found the sale agreement, the one where Chris had already signed off on selling the house to a buyer I'd never met. I stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't official yet, but it might as well have been. The house, my home, the place where my children grew up, it was already being sold behind my back. It hit me like a wave. Chris had already assumed I was done for. He'd already made his plans, thinking I was too weak to fight back. I balled up my fists, a surge of energy rushing through me. No, this wasn't how it was going to end. I wasn't going to let him take this from me, from the family we used to be. I wasn't done yet. It was time to take control, and I would make sure that Chris would never forget the cost of his indifference. I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let Chris win. But what could I do? I had nothing but time, and that, in itself, felt like both a blessing and a curse. It was during one of my restless nights, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, that I decided to go through the old papers and files in my study. There were years of receipts, old bills, and documents from the past. I told myself I was organizing, but deep down, I was searching for something, a way to take back control. My hands trembled slightly as I went through a pile of old papers, the soft rustle of the pages almost comforting in the stillness of the house. I flipped through legal documents, my will, my late husband's life insurance, medical records, old letters, when one piece of paper caught my eye. It was an agreement for the sale of the house, already signed by Chris. I froze. There it was, in black and white, My own son had already planned for the sale of our home. I'd been so blind. The thought of Chris walking around, negotiating with a buyer for the house he knew I loved, it cut deeper than any physical ailment could. The house wasn't just walls and a roof to me. It was my history, my memories, the very place I had raised him. And here he was, treating it like a commodity to be sold off the moment I wasn't useful to him anymore. The signature was clear, Chris Edwards. He had already signed the documents, pushing through the sale without even an ounce of consideration for what this house meant to me. But as I stared at the paper, something else caught my eye. A note in the corner of the page, something that had been almost overlooked in my initial shock. The buyer's name, and a date that was only a week away. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the cold rush of anger creeping up from my stomach, rising like an uncontrollable fire. My hands shook as I traced the name of the buyer, someone I had never heard of. How could Chris have made such a decision without consulting me? How could he have believed that he had the right to sell our home without even talking to me? I had never felt so betrayed. He had already planned my departure, and I hadn't even been given the chance to say goodbye. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Chris had underestimated me. He thought I was too weak, too fragile to notice. He thought he could get away with it without facing any consequences. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. He hadn't just been planning to sell the house. He was waiting for me to die, for me to just disappear. And when I was gone, he would move on, free to do whatever he wanted, without a second thought for me. I had been nothing but an obstacle to him, something to be discarded when the time came. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let Chris erase me from this house, from my legacy, just like that. I sat down at my desk, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it was unbearable. But there was something else stirring inside me. A fire that had been dormant for years, something that had been buried under layers of pain and neglect, was starting to rise. I would make him pay for this. I couldn't confront him just yet. I knew I had to play my cards carefully. But I had to act fast. My mind raced as I started to think through the details. I couldn't just let Chris walk away with everything. I needed a plan, and it needed to be one he would never see coming. There was no room for mistakes. I had to be precise. He had no idea what I was capable of, but he would find out soon enough. I stood up from the desk, clenching my fists. I was done being the victim. Chris had made a grave mistake, and now it was time for him to feel the consequences. The next morning, I began making calls, quietly, without letting anyone know what I was planning. I reached out to my lawyer, a woman I had trusted for years but hadn't needed to speak to in quite some time. I asked her to look over the paperwork for me, to find anything that might be useful. She agreed without asking too many questions, sensing the urgency in my voice. I also began to dig into the legalities of the house's sale. Was it too late for Chris to back out? Had he truly made it impossible for me to stop the sale? I needed to know everything. I felt like I was walking a fine line, balancing between acting too quickly and not acting fast enough. If I wasn't careful, Chris could sell the house right from under me before I had the chance to stop him. But as I pieced the plan together, one small detail after another fell into place. I would not let him get away with this. I was going to take back what was mine, and I would make sure he understood the price of his betrayal. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the image of Chris walking through the house, acting like everything was already decided. I imagined him already telling people that the house was as good as sold. I could almost hear his voice, so sure, so cold. But the truth was, he hadn't won. Not yet. I was going to make him realize just how much he had underestimated me. The days dragged on, filled with the steady rhythm of silence and resentment. I kept myself busy, pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to show Chris any signs of weakness. I didn't want him to see that the discovery of his betrayal had shaken me, not just physically, but deep in my bones. What had happened to my son? The boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved unconditionally, was now a stranger to me. His actions made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about what it meant to be a family. But what hurt more than anything wasn't just the sale of the house. It was the complete lack of regard he had for me as a person. I could feel it in the way he treated me, the way he barely even acknowledged my existence. I had always put him first. I had given him everything I had, sacrificed my time, my energy, my own desires to make sure he had the best life possible. And this was how he repaid me. It wasn't just that he wanted to sell the house, it was that he had already planned for it, without ever consulting me, without even pretending to care. It was the final blow that proved everything I had feared. Chris didn't see me as his mother anymore. I was just an obstacle in the way of his plans, a nuisance that needed to be dealt with. I began to realize that the last few years of my life had been spent trying to gain his approval, trying to be the perfect mother, trying to be enough for him. And what had it gotten me? A cold, indifferent son who was more concerned about his inheritance than about my well-being. It was like I didn't even exist in his eyes, except as a way to get what he wanted. I started to question everything. Had I done something wrong? Was there a moment when I had failed him? Had my love and care somehow been not enough? Or was he just always this way, only now revealing his true nature? It was impossible to know, but one thing was clear. I couldn't trust him anymore. The anger inside me only grew with each passing day. I wasn't just angry at Chris. I was angry at myself for not seeing this sooner. How had I missed the signs? How had I let myself get to this point? But I wasn't going to let it end like this. I wasn't going to let Chris destroy everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, without consequences. He had no idea what he had set in motion. I spent hours, days, poring over the sale documents, figuring out exactly where he had made his mistakes. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about dignity, about making sure Chris understood the price of his betrayal. He thought he had everything under control, but he didn't know what I was capable of. There were loopholes in the paperwork, things Chris hadn't considered, things he hadn't thought through because he was too focused on himself to care. He had underestimated me, and that was going to cost him. I began making arrangements, quietly, in the background. I reached out to a lawyer who had helped me years ago, someone I trusted. I didn't want Chris to know anything about it yet. I didn't want him to realize that I was taking control of the situation. He still thought I was weak, still thought I was just waiting for my time to be up. But he was wrong. As I walked through the house that had once been filled with love and laughter, I began to make my peace with the fact that things had changed. My relationship with Chris was broken. There was no going back to what we had before. But that didn't mean I was done. I wasn't going to let him take everything I had worked for, everything I had given him, without making him understand the consequences of his actions. I would show him that he couldn't just walk all over me. It was late one evening, as I sat alone at my desk, the soft click of the keyboard echoing in the quiet house, that I made the final decision. I had everything I needed, every document, every piece of evidence. I had a plan, and it was time to put it into motion. Chris had no idea what was coming. I thought back to all the times I had been there for him, when he was sick, when he needed support, when he made mistakes, and I bailed him out. I thought about the sleepless nights, the years of sacrifice, and now he was ready to sell the house, to sell me off like a piece of property. He thought I was weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But I had one thing Chris didn't expect. I had time. And in that time, I would make sure he paid the price for his betrayal. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. I knew it was time to start the process. No more waiting, no more second guessing. It was time for Chris to learn exactly what happens when you treat the people who love you the most as disposable. As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let Chris destroy everything, not without a fight. The days that followed felt heavy, like I was walking through thick fog, but beneath the surface, I was more focused than ever. The discovery of Chris's betrayal was only the beginning, and now I had to make sure that my plan, my quiet, calculated revenge, was set in motion. I had spent years being the supportive, selfless mother, always the one to give, to nurture, to put my family's needs above my own. But now, in this moment of weakness, it was time for me to reclaim what was mine. It was time for Chris to understand the cost of his selfishness. I couldn't afford to confront him just yet. I needed to stay hidden, to stay calm. If I acted too quickly, too visibly, he would see me coming, and that was the last thing I wanted. The longer I could keep him in the dark, the better my chances were. So, I kept the charade up, pretending to be the mother he expected. Fragile, weak, a mere shell of the woman I used to be. I started by gathering everything I could. I combed through the sale documents, looking for any mistakes Chris might have made. His arrogance had clouded his judgment. He thought he was in control, but I was the one holding all the cards now. I had legal loopholes, I had paperwork, and most importantly, I had time, something Chris thought he had the luxury of, but he didn't. I called my lawyer again, making sure she understood the urgency of the situation. I couldn't afford any delays. She was quiet for a moment, then gave me the advice I needed to hear. "You have the right to contest this," she said. "Chris doesn't have full control over the property just yet. He hasn't finalized everything, and you still have leverage." It felt good to hear those words. I wasn't completely powerless. I wasn't just sitting here waiting for him to sell me off like a commodity. There were still legal avenues, things he hadn't considered when he was making his plans. He'd made mistakes, and I was going to make sure he paid for them. As the days wore on, I began to execute my plan in pieces, quietly, steadily. I called in favors from friends, gathered all the information I could about the house and its legal status, and began to figure out how to slow down the sale process without raising any red flags. I knew that the moment Chris realized I was fighting back, it would be over for him. I couldn't let him see me coming. It had to be perfect. I didn't let him know I was aware of the sale, didn't let him know that I had already seen the paperwork. Instead, I acted as though I was too sick to deal with anything. I let him believe I was weak, incapable of understanding the legalities. He thought I was just going to let him take everything from me. But I wasn't weak. I started making small, calculated moves. I delayed things. I stalled. I made sure the paperwork was checked, rechecked, and checked again. Every time Chris thought he was making progress, I made sure to step in, quietly, methodically, to slow him down. The more I delayed, the more pressure he'd feel. The closer I got to taking control, I also started preparing something else, something I knew would break him. The hospital bills. They were mounting, and he had been so careless in his dealings that he didn't even consider how the financial burden would fall on him once I was gone. I began to gather all the medical bills, every invoice for the treatments I had undergone, every medication I had been prescribed. In the back of my mind, I knew what I was going to do with these documents. I was going to put them all in his name. The bills, the hospital fees, the overdue payments. I was going to make sure Chris knew exactly what it felt like to be responsible for something he thought he could get away with ignoring. I had no intention of leaving him anything. Not my house, not my money, nothing. He had treated me like I was disposable, and now I was going to show him just how far-reaching the consequences of that treatment could be. One afternoon, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, looking out over the front yard. It was one of those rare moments when everything seemed quiet, still, and peaceful. But inside, there was a storm brewing. I had taken the first steps toward getting back what was mine. My mind raced as I thought about the next steps. How to keep the pressure on Chris without revealing myself. How to keep him in the dark long enough for me to secure my victory. I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of my plan just yet. I had to wait for the right moment, the perfect opening to make my move. The house sale hadn't gone through yet. I had time. But time was running out. What made it all the more difficult was the fact that despite everything, I still loved him. He was my son. I had raised him, given everything I had to make sure he had a good life, and yet he had betrayed me in the most cruel way. He had turned his back on me when I needed him the most, but the betrayal had created something in me that I didn't recognize, an unrelenting desire for justice, for payback. I wasn't going to be the passive, invisible mother anymore. I wasn't going to let him get away with taking everything I had worked for. The days continued to pass, and as they did, I made more progress. I began to put my plan into action in ways that Chris wouldn't expect. Every time he tried to push forward, I pushed back, just enough to keep him off balance. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. I would make sure that he would understand what it meant to treat me like I was disposable. I would make sure he understood that the price of his betrayal would be higher than he ever imagined. And when the time was right, I would reveal my cards. Chris had no idea what was coming. He thought he was in control. He thought he could take everything without consequences. But I wasn't going to let him. Chris was getting bolder by the day. Every time I saw him, he seemed more confident, more assured that the house was his to sell, that he had already won. He thought I was weak, that I couldn't fight back, that I would just let him walk away with everything when the time came. He didn't know what I had been doing behind the scenes. I could almost hear the smugness in his voice, see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes whenever he spoke about finalizing the sale. He thought he had all the power, but I wasn't done yet. I spent hours each day in the house, moving through the motions, my mind always working on the next step. Every conversation with Chris felt like a game now. I would smile, nod, pretend I was too frail to understand what he was saying. The more I acted as though I didn't care, the more he let his guard down. He didn't suspect a thing. I was patient, waiting for the right moment to make my next move. It wasn't just about stalling anymore. It was about setting the stage for his downfall. I couldn't rush this. I had to make sure everything was in place, that when I finally struck, Chris would be completely blindsided. I had been working on the legal side of things, gathering the necessary documents, contacting professionals who could help me. I was creating a plan that was foolproof, one that would not only stop the sale, but would also make sure Chris bore the weight of his own actions. He was going to be the one to pay for everything, literally. I started making subtle changes. When Chris came over, I would ask him questions about the house, about the sale, questions that made him pause, think. I wanted to keep him off balance, make him second-guess his own decisions, but most importantly, I needed him to believe that I was still incapable of fully understanding the situation. I needed him to keep thinking that I was too sick to stop him, and while he thought he had time to finalize everything, I was working swiftly in the background. I began putting together a detailed paper trail, one that would force Chris to confront the consequences of his actions. I wasn't just going to fight for the house anymore. I was going to take everything from him. There were several steps I had to take before I could pull the rug out from under him. First, I needed to make sure the legal aspects of the sale were delayed. I had to find a way to ensure that Chris couldn't finalize anything without running into complications. I reached out to my lawyer again, and we began to find ways to tie up the paperwork. The sale wasn't finalized, not yet, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. At the same time, I began to prepare the final blow, putting the hospital bills in Chris's name. This was the moment that would bring everything together. The house, the bills, the consequences of his actions. He had underestimated me for far too long, but now I was going to make him understand what it meant to treat me like I was invisible. I started the process of transferring everything into his name, small debts at first, just enough to draw attention. I didn't want to make it too obvious, not yet, but soon, Chris would be buried under the weight of his own decisions. I couldn't wait for the moment when he finally realized what I had done. As the days passed, I could feel the tension building. Every conversation with Chris was a calculated move. He didn't know it, but he was playing right into my hands. I could see the stress beginning to creep into his face. The more I delayed things, the more pressure he started to feel. He thought everything was moving according to his plan, but the cracks were starting to show. He couldn't see it yet, but his world was about to crumble. Each time I spoke with him, I could sense his frustration growing. I could see his patience running thin. He was losing control, and I was gaining it. And the best part? He still didn't know that I was the one pulling the strings. I had made sure to manipulate the circumstances just enough to keep him from advancing. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more step I had to take, something that would shift the power completely in my favor. Chris had no idea what was coming. One night, I sat in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background as I reviewed everything I had done. I felt a strange calmness settle over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. The house, the bills, the legal documents, they were all going to fall into place. Chris's attempts to get away with his betrayal were going to fail. When the time came, I would finally reveal my hand, and when I did, he would understand that I wasn't someone to be discarded. The endgame was close now. I had done everything I needed to do. It was all falling into place. And when the moment came, I would make sure Chris understood that you don't treat people like they're disposable, especially not the ones who gave you everything. The pieces were almost in place. The longer this dragged on, the more anxious I became. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the way Chris had treated me, like I was nothing, a nuisance, an obstacle to his plans. The longer I watched him arrogantly go about his day, thinking the house was as good as sold, the more I realized just how little he had cared about me. All these years I had been there for him, pouring my heart into raising him, guiding him through the tough times, and now he was ready to dispose of me like an old piece of furniture. But he didn't know me anymore. He didn't know what I was capable of. The pieces were falling into place, but it wasn't time to strike just yet. I couldn't reveal my hand too soon. The subtle manipulations I had been setting in motion had started to cause cracks in his facade. but I had to make sure I timed my next move just right. I had worked tirelessly, making sure everything was delayed, pushing back the sale every chance I got. Every time Chris came over, I was playing my part perfectly. I pretended to be weak, frail, unable to handle much more. I'd smile and nod, acting as though I was completely unaware of what he was doing behind my back. But the truth was, I had every detail, every document, every piece of information I needed. He thought he was in control, but I was slowly pulling the strings. It was like a game of chess. Every move had to be calculated, every step had to be deliberate. I knew Chris would eventually grow impatient. He'd think I was too sick to deal with anything, too fragile to stop him. But every time I delayed, every time I made him wait just a little bit longer, I could see his frustration starting to build. He was losing his cool, and I was quietly gaining ground. I'd been working on the paperwork with my lawyer in the background. The delays in the sale were starting to pile up, and Chris was growing increasingly frustrated. I could see the stress in his eyes when he came by, his shoulders a little tighter, his words a little sharper. He had no idea that I was orchestrating all of this behind the scenes, making sure he couldn't move forward with his plans. It was around this time that I started to make my final move, the hospital bills. They were mounting, and I knew Chris had never bothered to consider the weight they would carry once I was gone. But I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. I contacted the medical billing office and arranged for all the outstanding bills to be placed in Chris's name. Slowly but surely, I began to transfer everything over to him. The bills, the hospital fees, the overdue payments, they all began to stack up in his name, one by one. I knew it would be the thing that finally shook him to his core. He thought he had control over the house, over my life, but he was about to realize that I was still the one holding the cards. One afternoon, I could hear Chris's car pull up in the driveway. I knew he was coming, and for once, I didn't feel the pit of dread in my stomach. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath and made my way into the living room, where I had set everything up just the way I wanted. When Chris walked in, he looked exactly the same as he always did. Self-assured, a little too confident. But today, he had no idea what he was about to walk into. "Mom, we really need to talk about this house," he said, his voice flat, as though the conversation had already been rehearsed. I stayed silent for a moment, studying him. His eyes flickered to me, but they weren't filled with concern, only impatience. He was done pretending to care about me. I could feel it in every word he spoke. "I've already told you, Chris, I'm not feeling well," I said softly, playing the role I had perfected. "You don't have to keep coming here to remind me of what you're planning." I saw the briefest flicker of annoyance cross his face. He wasn't expecting me to push back. He thought he could handle me like he always had, keeping me out of the loop, leaving me out of the important decisions. But he was wrong. He had underestimated me for far too long. "I know, Mom, but you need to understand that the house is a big deal," he said, his voice rising just slightly. "We can't keep holding on to it. It's time to move forward, you know?" I felt a surge of anger flood through me, but I kept it hidden behind my calm exterior. "I know exactly what you're doing, Chris," I said quietly, meeting his gaze for the first time with real intensity. "I know everything. You've been planning to sell this house for months, thinking I wouldn't notice, but I'm not as clueless as you think." His face stiffened, his mouth going thin. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, cutting him off. "You think you've been so clever, don't you? Making decisions for me without my consent, selling my home, selling me off like I'm nothing. But here's the thing, Chris," I continued, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You've made a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes are about to come back to haunt you." His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his face flushed with the anger I had provoked. "What are you talking about?" I gave him a small, knowing smile. "You'll find out soon enough." I could see the uncertainty in his eyes now, the cracks beginning to form in his confidence. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in on him. He had no idea how much trouble he was in. The game was far from over, and I was about to finish it. I would make sure that Chris would feel the full weight of his betrayal, and when I was done, he would never again think he could take advantage of me. He would learn the hard way that there were consequences to every action. The tension in the room was palpable, but I remained calm, knowing that the final move was close. Chris still had no idea what was coming. He thought he had all the control, but in reality, I had already won. Now, It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled for him. I could feel it in the air. The change was coming. There was a crackling tension between us now, something I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Chris seemed uncertain, unsure of himself. It was like he could sense the shift in power, but couldn't figure out what was happening. He was still trying to act as though everything was under control, but I could see the cracks in his facade, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down on him. That night, after Chris left, I sat in the quiet of my house, the house that he thought he was going to sell out from under me. I smiled to myself. He had no idea what was coming. He had no idea that I had already made sure his name was tied to every hospital bill, every overdue payment I had incurred. He was about to learn the consequences of his indifference. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind racing with the steps I still needed to take to ensure Chris felt the weight of what he'd done. He still didn't know about the bills, about the responsibility I'd placed squarely on his shoulders. I'd been careful to avoid any direct confrontation. I didn't want to give him the chance to backpedal. No, he would have to face everything head-on, just like I had to face his betrayal. As the day passed, I continued my quiet work. I could hear Chris moving around the house, making phone calls, finalizing paperwork. But today, he was distracted, agitated, and that was exactly what I needed. He was so focused on the sale that he couldn't even see how close he was to losing everything he thought he had. I knew it wouldn't take long for him to realize what was happening. His sense of control, the feeling that everything was going according to his plan, would soon vanish. The longer he pushed forward with the sale, the worse things would get for him. He was already drowning in debt, and the medical bills I had shifted into his name were about to make that debt even harder to ignore. It was late in the afternoon when I got the call from my lawyer. I could feel my pulse quicken as I picked up the phone. This was it. The final part of my plan was coming together. "Linda, we've got everything in place," my lawyer said. "I've filed the injunction to halt the sale. The house is officially in a holding pattern. Chris can't do anything further until the court resolves this. And based on the paperwork you sent, I've also filed for a lien on his personal assets for the outstanding debts." I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all settling in. Chris thought he had me figured out, that I would fade away, that I would let him sell everything and walk away. But now, his life was about to be turned upside down. He was going to lose the house, and those medical bills would follow him. No amount of manipulation would get him out of this. The next few days were a blur of legal documents and meetings, each step moving me closer to the final confrontation. I didn't hear from Chris directly, and I wasn't surprised. The realization must have hit him like a ton of bricks. He had no idea what to do next. When he finally came to the house, I could see the stress written all over his face. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a visible unease. I knew then that he had figured it out. He must have received the notice from my lawyer about the injunction. But it wasn't just that. I could see the horror in his eyes when he realized what was happening with the medical bills. He had been so careless, so consumed by his desire for the house, that he never thought to check the fine print. And now, it was too late. He walked in, trying to play it cool, but I could see the tension in his body. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes darting around as if he was looking for a way out. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking, though he was trying to sound authoritative. "I got this court order, and now I'm being tied to these bills. What did you do?" I looked at him, calm, collected. For the first time, I didn't feel the sting of pain. I didn't feel the crushing weight of betrayal. Instead, I felt powerful. This was my moment. "I did exactly what you deserved, Chris," I said softly. "You thought you could take everything from me. You thought you could just sell me off like I was nothing. But here's the thing. I'm not done yet, and neither is the house. You've made too many mistakes, and now you'll pay for them." His face went pale. He opened his mouth to argue, to fight back, but no words came. Instead, his eyes flickered to the papers in his hand, the injunction, the notice about the bills, and he seemed to deflate, like all the air had been sucked out of him. "Mom," he began again, his voice trembling now. "This is insane. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know all this would happen?" I shook my head, looking at him with pity. "You didn't know, because you never cared enough to ask, Chris. You were too busy making plans without me, without even considering that I might have a say in what happens to this house. But you've learned a hard lesson today." I could see him grappling with the reality of it all. His world was falling apart, and I was the one who had made it happen. The moment of clarity was evident on his face. He was realizing that he had underestimated me, that he had thought I would just roll over and die, letting him take everything. But now, he was the one trapped in a situation he couldn't fix. "You can't just do this," he protested weakly. "I've been planning this for months. It's not just about the house, it's about my future." I stared at him, feeling the heat of anger surge through me again. "And what about my future, Chris? What about the years I spent raising you, taking care of you, only for you to throw it all away? You never even asked what I wanted. You thought you could just walk all over me. But now, you've lost it all." Chris's shoulders slumped as he finally seemed to accept the gravity of the situation. He had no way out. All the power he thought he had was gone, and it was never coming back. I wasn't just reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect. I was showing him and myself that I wasn't the invisible, dispensable mother he had thought I was. The battle wasn't over yet. There was still a court date ahead, still a future to be determined. But for now, in this moment, I had won, and it felt damn good. The dust hadn't fully settled yet, but I could feel the weight of everything changing in my favor. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about making Chris understand that there were consequences to his actions. It was about showing him that he couldn't just treat people, especially me, the way he had and walk away unscathed. I had learned a lot in these past few weeks, but the most important lesson was this: power isn't just about money or control. It's about having the patience and the will to fight back when everyone expects you to roll over and give up. Chris sat across from me, his face still pale from the shock of the injunction and the mounting debts he had no way of escaping. He was silent, which was unlike him. Normally, he would argue, try to spin things in his favor, but now he seemed to understand that the battle was lost. "Mom," he finally said, his voice hoarse, "you have to know that this isn't just about you. It's about the future. I can't afford to wait around while you try to stall everything. I've been working for years to get things in order, and now you're just throwing it all away." I leaned back in my chair, arms folded across my chest. For a moment, I allowed myself to listen to his words, words that had once meant something to me. Once, I would have tried to calm him, reassure him that everything would be okay, but that person didn't exist anymore. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't just about me, Chris. This is about the choices we make and how they affect everyone around us. This is about you treating me like I was disposable. I didn't ask for this, but now I'm done watching you trample all over me, all over everything I've worked for." His eyes narrowed, as though he was trying to make sense of what I was saying. I could see the gears turning in his head, but they weren't clicking. He hadn't connected the dots yet, hadn't realized the full extent of what I had done. He thought he could still talk his way out of it, that if he just kept going, kept pushing, it would all be over soon. But I wasn't done. "I've had enough, Chris," I said, the words coming out softer than I intended. "I've had enough of the way you've treated me. You thought you could take everything I had without even asking, that I wouldn't notice. You didn't even care to find out what I wanted, what I needed. You just assumed that once I was gone, you could walk away and start over." His face twisted, the frustration and anger building in his eyes. "You don't get it," he snapped. "This is my future, too. I can't just let you hold me back forever. You've had your life, Mom. I've got mine to figure out." I could see the arrogance in his words, the belief that somehow his pain, his future, was more important than mine. The thing he still didn't understand was that everything he had, everything he thought he could control, was built on my sacrifices. I had given him everything, and now he was demanding more. "Your future?" I repeated, my voice suddenly rising. "You think your future is more important than everything I've done for you? You think you have the right to decide what happens to me, to the house, just because you feel entitled to it?" He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "I'm not done yet, Chris. You wanted this house. You thought you could sell it and get rid of me. Well, you'll have to fight for it now. You'll have to fight to keep it." His face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" I reached for the pile of legal documents that had been sitting on the table the entire time. Slowly, deliberately, I slid them across the table toward him. His eyes darted over the papers, the realization starting to set in as he saw the familiar names of lawyers and court officials. "Those are the papers to halt the sale," I said. "And those hospital bills you've been ignoring? They're in your name now. All of them. I made sure of it. You wanted me gone so you could get everything, but now you'll have to deal with the debts, the bills, and the consequences. I'm not just handing you this house, Chris. You'll have to work for it. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents. The realization hit him like a freight train. He could see the liens on the house, the legal holds, the growing debts in his name, the bills, the court orders. It was all coming down on him. He had no way out now. He couldn't just sell the house and disappear. Not anymore. He looked up at me, the anger finally boiling over. "You can't do this," he spat, his voice breaking. "This isn't fair. You're punishing me for everything I've done. I never asked for this. I never asked to be responsible for you, for all of this." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You didn't ask for it, but you took it anyway. You took what wasn't yours, and now you have to face the consequences." Chris stood up, his hands trembling. He looked like a man who had lost everything. And in a way, he had. He had lost his sense of control, his plan to walk away unscathed. He had underestimated me, thought I was weak and invisible. And now, it was too late for him to fix it. "I'm done here," he said, his voice shaking with frustration and helplessness. "I can't deal with this anymore." "Then don't," I said, my voice cold, final. "You don't get to walk away from the mess you've made. Not this time." He left the house in a hurry, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, but I didn't feel relief. I felt something else, something heavier. The weight of what I had just done settled in, but I wasn't sorry. Not anymore. I had done what I needed to do. I had made him face the truth. He had tried to tear me down, to erase me from his life, but I wasn't gone. And now he would carry the weight of his actions. He would remember this. He would remember what happens when you treat the ones who love you like they don't matter. The game was over, and I had won. It had been days since Chris had stormed out of the house, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. The house, once a symbol of my life and my sacrifices, now felt like the final battleground. It was clear that everything I had done, everything I had set in motion, had led us here. This was the end game. I hadn't heard from Chris since that last encounter. He'd been silent, perhaps stunned, perhaps trying to figure out a way to undo the mess he had found himself in. But I knew better now. The game had changed. He couldn't just erase everything. His arrogance, his sense of entitlement, those things were now his undoing. But as much as I had taken control, I couldn't deny the fact that deep down, this was still my son. The same boy who once curled up on my lap when he was sick. The same one who laughed and shared his dreams with me when he was young. The betrayal stung like 1,000 bee stings, but he was still my flesh and blood. And despite everything, I knew that this confrontation, the one we were headed toward, was inevitable. It would either break him or it would break me. The phone rang just as I was sitting down for the evening. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. I knew who it was before I even saw the name on the screen. "Mom," Chris said, his voice shaking. He had been defeated, but there was still something in his tone that felt like the remnants of pride, of defiance. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath. This was it, the final conversation, the moment that would seal everything. "Come over," I said simply, my voice calm, steady. "We'll talk." He arrived an hour later. The door creaked open, and there he was, looking exactly the same, but somehow different. There was no longer that swagger, that arrogance. Now his face was etched with uncertainty, guilt, and, dare I say it, fear. I didn't know how to fix this," he started, his voice quieter than usual, more vulnerable. It was the first time in months that I had heard him speak like this. "I didn't think things would get so out of control. I thought I was just helping, that I was just doing what needed to be done." I looked at him, and for a moment it was as if the weight of the years between us evaporated. The mother in me, who had spent her life loving and protecting him, wanted to reach out, but I held myself steady. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about me, about reclaiming the dignity that he had stripped from me. I wasn't the invisible woman anymore. "I know exactly what you were doing. Chris," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "You thought you could make all the decisions. You thought I wouldn't care, that I wouldn't fight for what's mine. But you underestimated me." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "I gave you everything, Chris, and you took it. You took me for granted, took my life, my love, and now you're left holding the consequences of your actions. You can't just walk away from this. Not this time. He swallowed hard, his eyes searching mine, as though looking for a way out. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I was doing the right thing by selling the house. I didn't know what else to do. You weren't exactly making it easy for me, you know? I could feel the familiar ache in my chest, but I pushed it aside. He was still trying to justify everything, trying to paint himself as the victim, but there was no sympathy left for him. Not now. You never asked what I wanted. Chris, I said quietly. You never cared. You thought I'd just go quietly, let you sell everything and take the house, without a word. Well, here's the thing. I'm not your doormat. I'm not someone you can just walk all over when it's convenient. I'm your mother, and I'm not going anywhere. His face twisted, a mix of frustration and guilt. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't realize how much this would affect you. You don't get it, I said, the pain suddenly rising in my chest. It's not about the house, Chris. It's about how you treated me. You thought I was nothing. You thought you could get away with everything. You didn't see me as your mother anymore, did you? You saw me as a liability, something to get rid of. The silence between us stretched, and I saw the realization dawn on his face. He had been so focused on himself, on his own needs, that he hadn't stopped to think about the woman who had given him everything. The woman who had fought for him, who had sacrificed so much for him to have a better life. I could see the guilt building, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. The Chris I had once known, the boy who was compassionate, who cared for others, was still inside him, maybe buried under layers of ambition, of entitlement, but it was there. I don't know how to fix this, he muttered, his eyes now downcast. What do you want me to do? How do I make this right? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. You can't fix this. You can't undo the damage, but you can learn. You can learn that you can't just take what isn't yours. You can't treat people like they're disposable. I paused, letting my words settle in. This wasn't about me seeking revenge. This wasn't about making him suffer. It was about making him see what he had done to me. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment he would understand. You'll have to face the consequences. Chris, you'll have to deal with the debt. The house is no longer an option for you. But I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to make sure you never treat anyone this way again. Not your family, not the people who love you. He stood there, shoulders slumped, defeated. For the first time, he wasn't the boy who demanded everything. He was the man who had learned the hard way that actions have consequences. I'll pay the bills. I'll take responsibility for it, he said quietly. I want to make it right, somehow. I nodded, a sense of closure finally settling in. This was as much for me as it was for him. I had taught him the hardest lesson of all. You can't use people for your own gain without paying the price. I'm glad to hear that, I said, finally feeling the weight lift. It's a start. He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he stopped and turned back to me. His voice, though shaky, was sincere. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. And with that, he walked out, leaving me standing in the house that had once been a symbol of our family. For the first time in years, I felt free. The battle had been long and painful, but it was over. I had regained my control. I had shown Chris what it truly meant to respect those who love you. And in doing so, I had reclaimed not just the house, but my dignity. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and now it was time to move on. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. The house was quieter now. After Chris's departure, it felt like the last of the tension had finally left the air, leaving behind a profound stillness that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the house felt like mine again, not just a space I had been trapped in, but a home, my home. I stood in the living room, looking around at the worn furniture, the pictures on the walls, the clutter I had ignored for months. It all seemed different now, not in a bad way, but in a way that felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, a chapter where I was no longer invisible, where I wasn't just the person everyone leaned on, but the one who had learned to stand tall on her own, despite the years of sacrifice. I'd done it. I had fought for my life, for my dignity, for my right to exist on my own terms. I had won the hardest battle of all, not against Chris, but against the idea that I would fade away, forgotten and discarded. And when I looked at the house now, I didn't just see the years of love and labor I had poured into it. I saw the strength I had found in myself, The phone rang again, pulling me out of my reverie. I looked at the caller ID. It was Chris. I had expected this call, perhaps the last piece of closure I needed. I picked up the phone, the quiet strength in my voice surprising even myself. "Hello? Mom," Chris's voice came through, hesitant but steady. "I just wanted to let you know I'm taking care of the bills. I'm setting up a payment plan. I didn't realize how much I hurt you, and I know it doesn't fix everything, but I'm trying to make things right." His words felt like an olive branch, not one I had expected, but one I knew he had to offer. I didn't respond right away. I just let the words hang in the air for a moment, considering them carefully. I'd spent so many years putting everyone else's needs above my own. I had spent so long trying to make Chris proud, trying to earn his affection and respect, but I had learned a hard truth. I could never truly be proud of myself if I didn't start respecting my own boundaries. This wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about getting everything back the way it was. It was about letting go of the past and finally accepting that I was worthy of respect, of love, and of peace. "Thank you, Chris," I finally said, my voice calm and steady. "That means a lot to me. I'm glad you're taking responsibility. I'll do better." "Mom, I promise. I won't make the same mistakes again," he said. And for the first time, I believed him. We didn't talk for long. He didn't need to apologize for everything. He needed to show me through his actions that he understood, that he would change, that he would be a son I could be proud of once more. After I hung up, I sat there in the silence, letting everything sink in. This was the end, the final chapter of a story that had twisted and turned in ways I couldn't have imagined when it first began. But it was also the beginning of something new, a life where I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, a life where I could finally live for me. The next few weeks were full of small adjustments, things that slowly began to heal the wounds I had carried for so long. I took my time sorting through the house, getting rid of the things that no longer served me, both physical items and emotional baggage. It was cathartic, almost like shedding a skin I had outgrown. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter. I spent more time on the things I loved, painting, reading, gardening. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty about it. I had given enough. It was time to give to myself. Chris and I had a few more conversations, and with each one, I saw more of the son I had raised. He was still learning, still figuring out how to make amends, but I knew that things were changing. Slowly but surely, we were rebuilding what had been broken. Not everything could be fixed, but I didn't need it to be. The most important thing I had learned was that redemption didn't always look the way you expected. Sometimes it was quieter, more subtle, and it had to come from within. As I sat in my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the garden I'd spent the afternoon tending, I realized something profound. I had been through hell, betrayed, ignored, disrespected, but I had come out the other side stronger, more resilient. My life, though far from perfect, was mine to shape. The house was still here. And more importantly, so was I. The years of living in someone else's shadow were over. I had faced my greatest fears, losing everything, being forgotten, and I had come through stronger than before. The house was no longer a symbol of loss. It was a symbol of my strength, my survival, my redemption. And as I looked out at the sunset, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was finally my time. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.